Hi there, welcome to the Sound Media Showcase, and today I am joined by Nicola Broomham of Broomham Recruitment, but more importantly for us anyway, the Broomham Podcast. For anyone that doesn't know about it, Nicola, tell us a little bit about your podcast if you would do.
Sure. So despite the fact that I'm a recruiter, the podcast is actually all about a place for people in property to talk about something that they care about and something they're passionate about. We put a little bit of a spin on it into the sense that the podcast isn't about us inviting people onto the show to talk. It's about them approaching me to say, I want to talk about something I care about. So we touch on mental health, we touch on compliance and boring estate agency bits, but we also talk about community stuff and loads of different things, anything that anybody's passionate about really in the property industry.
So what was kind of your initial thinking behind doing it?
Initially, I wanted to do it because I got sick of seeing podcasts and webinars with the same faces on. Our industry is a really incestuous industry and everyone knows everyone, and there seem to be the same sort of 20 faces on rotation. And I wanted to create a space and a place where people that weren't those 20 places could have, or 20 faces I should say, could have a place to come and talk about things that they cared about, their opinions, their stories and their journeys, rather than just us always listening to the same ones on repeat.
Makes sense. As we speak now, it's still relatively early days, really. You're kind of a couple of months into the podcast now. I think that you've taken to it like a duck to water, but how have you found getting started and getting going in terms of podcasting?
To be totally honest, I probably wing it most of the time, which is Nicola Broomham all over. When I set this up, I didn't really know how it was going to go. I hadn't really strategized it properly. I hadn't put a huge amount of thought into it, and I thought I'd just sort of see where it went. And I've been really surprised at how many people have listened to it, how many people want to be part of it. I think one of the things that I was taught very early on is that I need to make sure I'm planning ahead. So I'm always a few podcasts ahead of myself, so that if I'm ill or if something happens or I go away, that I've got things in the bag ready to launch. And I'm almost at the point where I'm too far ahead of myself, and I have to be careful with all those guests that we don't talk about anything that's current. But I really enjoy doing them. I can talk for Britain, and I love listening to the things that have come out of it. And some people have shared things with me and with the audience that are incredibly personal and really quite shocking at times. We've had conversations about suicide and things like that, which have really been quite a hard listen. But it's what people have wanted to talk about, and I've just kind of embraced that and run with it, really. I love doing it. I love doing the podcast, and more than I thought I would.
That's brilliant. I mean, as you say there are some quite hard-hitting episodes, to the point where, for me, obviously, we spoke kind of right at the start when you were first getting going, but I've been quite surprised about some of the subjects that have come up in your episodes, because I kind of think about property recruitment, and I wouldn't have expected a podcast in that space to cover some of the really deep things that it has done. What's kind of the reaction and the feedback been like that you've had? Because I guess from an audience point of view as well, for a listener, it's probably not the kind of content that you would necessarily expect from all the sort of the elements when you think about who you are and the business and the industry and stuff like that. I imagine it probably takes people by surprise a little bit.
It did. It certainly did. The first episode that we did was all about anxiety in the workplace and coming out as being a gay woman in a state agency. And I think that very much has set the tone for the podcast thereafter. The feedback on it has been incredible, actually. There are lots of people that do podcasts in the property space, and they generally revolve around the same sort of topics. And I'm not a typical person in the property space. Our company isn't a typical recruiter in our space either. So I think it wasn't necessarily that much of a shock for us to have gone down the route that we have. But the support for it has been amazing. We've had lots of people that have shared it. We've been championed on a couple of other, in fact, a couple of other podcasts recommended our podcast within the property space because of what it's all about. And actually, the feedback has been fantastic. And I think it's going to be one of those things that will grow and grow and grow, because we're only, two and a half months in. So I think I'm really pleased with it so far. And the thing is, I've got to thank all the people that are coming on and sharing these incredible stories. So, yeah.
Brilliant. I think, certainly exciting to see kind of where it does go in the future. So as you say, kind of, 2.5, 3 months into this. So this feels like slightly kind of unfair to ask you this, but would be very interesting to see. So what's your one tip for other podcasters from your journey so far?
I think my big tip is don't talk about it too much before you go on air. I had this with a podcast last week where we were talking again about quite a controversial and emotive issue. And I just really wanted to get their background on why they wanted to talk about this and why it was important to them. And before I knew it, we were kind of 10 plus minutes into this chat. And I'm thinking to myself, I really should have hit record from the off, and I didn't. And so then I had to almost go back and get them to tell me everything again. And it didn't have that natural passion and flow and feel to it that it had in that first bit. So it almost felt a little bit staged. So I guess the thing that I've learned quite quickly is don't try and prep too much. You need to prep and you need to know where it's going to go and ultimately what you're trying to achieve out of that podcast, but don't overplan.
That's an absolutely brilliant point, and I'm kind of nodding away because I can totally relate to this. One of the podcasts that I do, which is with a group of 3 other people that we used to do in person. Obviously, it's moved kind of remotely, but we used to find that we'd maybe see each other once a month to do this recording. So we'd sit down and we'd get talking, and we'd be talking about things. And I used to have a phrase of "save it for the pod," because we'd be talking about stuff, and it's like we need to be recording this. Save it for the pod, and it just kind of become one of those things where a couple of them start talking, and I'd be sat there waving, going, "You know what I'm going to say? Save it for the pod." And it's so true, isn't it? Because you do. I think when you try and relive a conversation second time, it loses a bit of that organic feel and a bit of that realness that's important for every podcast, but particularly for some of the things that you're talking about in your show. That's really, really important to have that kind of organic feel to it. So that's a really brilliant point. So then I've got to ask you, how have myself and Sound Media, how have we been able to kind of help you along the way?
Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. You've helped me set this up from the beginning. I've never done a podcast, never recorded any kind of audio, really, other than the odd, Instagram or Facebook video or whatever it may be. So my knowledge of podcasts going into this was actually pretty small, to be honest. And I really felt that you held my hand throughout the whole of that onboarding, helping me choose the music and explaining to me how it was all going to work, showing me how all the back end of podcasts are and understanding the analytics and things like that. And every time I had a couple of episodes which I needed a really quick turnaround on, and you were there, you were on it. You've been really organised with putting everything's in the right, the folders ready for me, communicating. I love your little voice notes. So for me, yeah, you've been great, and the editing's been fantastic and seamless as well, taking out all my and telephone calls that come in between.
I don't know what we used to do in the world before we had WhatsApp voice messaging to communicate with each other. Like, I mean, I assume we actually used to speak to people on the phone, but like, what a strange concept that is. That's brilliant. Thank you. I mean, I think the show is just blooming brilliant, and I'm so glad that you decided to do it. They are such important issues, and they're tackled in such a way that's it's so real, it's so organic. It doesn't have that preachy feel that a lot of things that touch on things like mental health can have. And there's such important conversations that you're having. If there's anyone that hasn't heard the show before or wants to find out a bit more about it, what's the best way of them going about that?
Well, it's on Spotify, it's on Amazon, it's on Apple Music. We have a new show that's released every Wednesday. That's our kind of hump day. Have a little bit of something to listen to on your Wednesday lunch break. We've got a LinkedIn page, and there's an Instagram page as well with some information on each of the guests that we've got coming on each week. And if anybody is in property that does want to talk about something that they're passionate about, then get in touch with me.
Brill, thank you, Nicola. If you want to find out more about Sound Media, head to wearesoundmedia.com or on the socials at wearesoundmedia. Nicola, thank you for your time and the best of luck with the months and years that lay ahead for the Broomham Podcast.
Thank you.